Hello, I am so happy to be here with Stephanie Von Meeteren. And we're going to have a great talk today about menopause and how yoga therapy can help with the menopausal symptoms that so many of us are experiencing in perimenopause and menopause and beyond. I think this discussion could even go to premenstrual syndrome and just some of the other hormonal imbalances that we tend to get throughout our lifetime, maybe going into childbirth or coming out of childbirth. There's so many things that we're going to talk about today that really kind of tie into women's health and hormones. But before we get started, I just want to thank Give Back Yoga, who is our co-producer and sponsor. And one of the really cool things that they're offering is that for $19 a month, you can come on this podcast every Thursday with whoever we have as a guest and do Q&A with us and put in questions. And then you get 2 other courses as part of that $19 a month package. So I think that's a really great deal. And we do have some guests on here today. Lori and Susan, thank you for coming. So nice to see you. And I hope you'll put some questions in the chat. And then our sponsor today is Optimal State Yoga Therapy School. And they have a 9-day module every September. It happens every year. And it's the assessment and therapeutic planning for physical injuries like neck, low back, wrist, ankle, knee, hips, sciatica, sacroiliac joint problems. So how do we assess those things from a yoga therapy perspective? And then how do we create a therapeutic treatment plan? So if you're interested in that, come to www.amywheeler.com and we'll give you more information. Like I said, it happens every September. So I would love to welcome Stephanie Von Meeteren, who has an amazing story to tell us about her 40th birthday in menopause. But she also has a thriving Facebook group called, and anyone can join, right, Stephanie? The Wild Hormones Menopause Natural Symptom Relief and Support Group. If you just put in Wild Hormones into Facebook group, you'll probably have it pop up. And Stephanie is also kind of active on Clubhouse talking about the same topic. But before we get into all this, tell us about your 40th birthday, Stephanie.
Oh my, okay. So 40 was a big one for me. I had a 2-year-old. I was in Hawaii celebrating with family, my 40th. And the day before my birthday, we went on this beautiful hike and I was carrying the 2-year-old in the pack. So we went down to a volcano and then back out. It was a pretty long hike. And the next day I was swimming in the ocean and I felt this sharp pain in my chest, and it immediately sent me into like an anxiety mode, right? In hindsight, I realized what was actually going on, which was, it was a costochondritis, it was like a pinch, a rib thing. But the anxiety kind of stayed with me for a while. And by figuring out, through going to doctors and everything else, it was actually the start of perimenopause. And a gigantic vata imbalance. So for those of you who know what that is. So very
we'll
much
into that.
Very much out of balance. And, now looking back at that, I realize all the symptoms of that and, how to bring that imbalance back into balance so that you don't suffer with those things. But the perimenopause symptoms, I'm on the long end for sure. I'm 55 and still waiting for full confirmation. I'm in like cycle day 160. So I'm hoping this is it. I mean, if it is, it is. And if it isn't, it isn't. So
can I just stop you for a minute?
Sure.
I love it that you just told us what day of your cycle you're on. 160. You haven't had your menstrual cycle for several months and you don't know if you're done or not.
Yeah. Well, you need to wait for, in the US, we say 365 days typically. And in the UK, I know they say maybe 15 months, just to be sure. I would play it safe. Like if I didn't have a cycle for 365 days and then I started bleeding, I would go and see my doctor, because you're not supposed to bleed when you're in postmenopause at all. No spotting, nothing. And if you are, you should go see your doctor. So I would play it in the safe mode. So I'll stay with the 12 months. Um, but
And can we also just say how lucky we are as women that we have this very clear signal, because men go through andropause, which is just like a woman's menopause. All the hormones change. You go into a completely new way of being in the world. But men don't have that clear signal of, I haven't had my menstrual cycle for 160 days. I think I might be going into menopause. And so
yeah,
I feel so happy that we as women have those very clear signals, because I think a lot of men don't even know andropause exists.
absolutely. I totally agree. I mean, they mark it down to like, oh, midlife, midlife crisis. And it's like, it's andropause. You're doing all this, whatever it is, however it manifests, with the same things that women are going through. They're whatever they're happening in their body and mind. But a couple things came to mind with just you prompting that, which was, I think it's so important, since we do have the external indicator, to track our cycles. Whether it's your fertile years for birth control or trying to get pregnant or whatever it is, through into your postmenopausal years, when you pass through that threshold of menopause, and now you are no longer, you know in that time of life, you are now postmenopausal. So I think it's really important to do the tracking like that.
Isn't it amazing that having your menstrual cycle is such a huge part of our lives, since we're our first menstrual cycle? And yet nobody's teaching us to track it. I mean, I didn't start learning how to track when I was ovulating until I wanted to have a child. And then I got, really serious about it. But I wish someone had taught me at 12 years old how to know what was happening to me and my body, and what I could expect at the beginning of the bleeding versus when I did ovulate, versus that horrendous week before I got my menstrual cycle. And I didn't know what was going on. And I just don't understand why we don't teach women how to track their hormones and their menstrual cycles very early on in life.
I agree thoroughly. Yeah, I'm with you. I didn't learn even the signs of that until, we were trying to get pregnant also, and it was like, oh, okay. th- th- I didn't even know my body did all these things, and I think it's so important. And it's just like with menopause, I think it's being talked about more and more now, or maybe it's just because I'm so in, like, this is my specialty and I'm so enmeshed in it. It's like, oh, you buy a red car and you see red cars everywhere. But it seems like it's being talked about more and more. And it's really important. I mean, women who, well, anybody who's going through this transition, whether you're in the workplace or not, it's like the symptoms are real and they can wreak havoc on your life. They can they can make you feel like you're going crazy, or you can't think right, and you're in even if you're not in a profession where you need to think properly and be less foggy brained, you know, being at home, if you're at home, you still don't want to be foggy brained, it's not much fun. So
I told you that story of, as I've been going through perimenopause and menopause, I'm standing up in front of 35 college students, and I'm halfway through a sentence, and I have no idea what the end of the sentence is, because I can't remember what the beginning of the sentence was. And not only that, I'm thinking, what am I going to make up? How am I going to complete this thought? Because I'm just so foggy brained. Not only that, but I get extremely anxious because I can't think straight and I'm expected to be clear. And then I start sweating like crazy, just dripping. And, at some point I just said to the kids, I was like, you know what? This is what happens to a woman when she's middle-aged. Probably your mothers are going through this. I just have to deal with you know, and for me, it lasted quite a long time. Like I would say 3 to 4 years of serious symptoms where it was debilitating.
Yeah.
How about you? How long did it take you to enter into, like, has there been a time period for you?
You know, I say 40, but in hindsight, I think it was, when the anxiety started, I think that was a vata. Like I hurt myself physically and then it triggered stuff and I realized I was totally out of balance, right?
Mhm.
Years later. I mean, this took years. So I would say I'm a good 10 years though. So I am definitely on the long end. Um, you know, that's when I started seeing more of the irregular cycles, the cycles getting shorter and more erratic and then real long cycles. So um, I'd say a good 10 years. But, like the UK, they're ahead of us in a lot of ways. And I know that they are working on some bills and stuff to be able to support women in the workplace who are going through menopause. I'm not sure exactly what that entails, but there's an acknowledgement of that. Just like there should be better, paternity and maternity leave to be able to bond with your child. There should be something for women's, if you have a really hard time with your period, like PMDD or something like that, they should respect that and they should give you your space to be able to do that, because by giving the space to people and being able to take the time off and the time you need for self-care, you're more productive at work. So it's only a win-win for the economy and for all the, corporations who are just thinking more work is better, because that's really not the case.
Well, and maybe this new online work from home environment that COVID has shown us actually works. Maybe that can be part of the solution, because it is easier to do self-care between meetings when you're at home and lie down for 20 minutes if you need to.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And just the aspect of needing to be around a lot of people if you're a highly sensitive person, or even if you're not, maybe just being around so many people and so much external stimuli all the time, it can totally send you out of balance and aggravate your symptoms.
Right.
So I
So
think the online's great. Yeah.
before we get into the symptoms and how we might be able to help people, you and I have also talked about how different cultures view menopause differently, and how maybe in India, a woman might be happy to be like, oh, good, I'm done with my menstrual cycle. I'm ready to move into this new phase of life. And it might even be a shorter time period from perimenopause all the way through. But in the United States, a lot of women are seeking that fountain of youth and don't want to get old and don't want to look old. And so for us, it seems like it's taking many, many more years because we're resisting this natural process. What do you think of that? And do you have anything to add?
Absolutely. I totally agree. I mean, the average age in America and the UK is 51 for menopause to actually pass through that threshold and be postmenopausal. And in India, it's 46. Why is that? I think that's interesting on its own. But our culture is so much geared, I mean, we've heard this for so long. It's geared for the anti-aging, instead of pro-age, it's anti-age. And it's like, that's a strange thought process on its own, I think. It's like aging is going to happen because change happens constantly. And I think it's a cultural thing. At least in America, my perception is we fight anything that is going to take us away from that strong, beautiful, 20-year-old doing a handstand on the beach, or a scorpion on the beach. It's like, wow, that's really awesome. I couldn't do it when I was 20, and I'm not going to even try now. But, it's our culture, I think, as far as that, and needing to embrace the cycle of nature. I think as Americans, I mean, this is a general stereotype, but I think as a culture, we're very disconnected with nature overall versus other countries where maybe they're closer to the land, closer to the cycles of nature, and honor and respect those. Um, yeah, because we're not going to win against nature. You may cover it with asphalt, and there's going to be a crack, and a weed is going to grow through. It's just the way it goes. Nature always wins.
And I don't know about you, and I'm sure some of the other women listening and the men who've been going through andropause, but I love being older. I love moving towards the age of wisdom and being a crone. This is my
Mhm.
favorite time of life. I feel more stable, more balanced emotionally. For me personally, my menstrual cycles used to bring my mood and my energy levels just up and down, and since having these changes, I am so much more stable, and I love it. I love this phase of life. How do you feel? Are you there yet that you
Um,
can
you,
love it?
yeah, oh, well, I've totally embraced it, but I acknowledge that going through the process for a lot of people, it can be very, very challenging. And there's a grief that comes with it, whether that's cultural or not, I don't know, but there's a grief that can accompany that perceived loss of what was, of what we were, of what we perceived ourselves to be. And largely, I think, due to our culture, a lot of women have a lot of problems going through the transition, especially in America. I mean, a lot of other countries don't have as many problems with going through menopause. They don't have as many symptoms. They don't have much suffering from it. It's just, okay. And so maybe I get some hot flashes and I'm on my way. It's a big deal here, and we're constantly, like you said, looking for like the magic pill that's going to fix it, to keep us young forever. And I'm ready to be a crone. That's why I'm like, okay, cycle day 159, 160, let's do this. Like, I'm ready. It's the wisdom years, we're the wisdom holders. We're not bleeding our blood out. We're holding it in, even though there's no blood, but, no uterine lining or endometrial lining. But it's like, we're holding that wisdom in to be able to bring forth the wisdom to hopefully the next generation, or guidance for the society. That was the traditional place of women's wisdom in other cultures.
And I would imagine as a yoga therapist, you would help people connect back to the cycles of nature, connect back to valuing being an elder and being wise, and helping people see the beauty of this new way of being in the world instead of only grieving the loss. I mean, I would imagine you can help uh, women grieve the loss too, but I think that mental emotional support and knowing that someone is there to talk to you. I mean, when I was going through it, I had no idea what was coming. Nobody had talked to me about it. I didn't understand it. I actually thought I might have early onset dementia. I'm not even kidding. I would say to my husband, I think something's really, really wrong. And he'd be like, no, 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 you're fine. And thankfully it passed finally. But like, we need someone to talk to, and to have them help us understand, like, this is a normal part of your hormones changing, and you probably don't have dementia at age 46. I mean, there are people that
Mhm.
do have early onset dementia, but I just needed somebody to comfort me and tell me that this is the normal process. I wish I'd met you at that time, Stephanie.
I would have comforted you. But no, I actually went through the brain foggy thing too. And my story, I wasn't teaching in front of a university class, but I literally almost burned our house down because I forgot about something on the stove. I totally forgot. We left. Came back. I was like, what's that smell? I'm like, oh my gosh. I mean, that's really scary. It's like I had to constantly double check myself, but I see Susan and Lori both said that they had the same thing. The foggy brain is a tough one, right? But with yoga therapy, with the proper practices practices, we can correct that imbalance in ourselves and not have those issues. So that's a beautiful thing.
So let's start with the Western view of what we can do from yoga therapy, and then let's get into the Eastern view, because yoga therapy depends on both. And I think from my perspective, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, that if we have what we call a dysregulated nervous system, which most of us do in this day and age, that is going to create havoc. And especially the nervous system is so connected to the endocrine system, which is responsible for, keeping our hormones balanced, that, when you were having those panic attacks or anxiety or maybe insomnia, that could have been a sign that your nervous system was actually not in balance, and that is a driver of why the hormones get out of balance through the endocrine system. Do you want to say anything more about that? Maybe the vagus nerve or anything about that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's so tied in too with our gut health, right? We hear so much about the gut health, but if 95% of our serotonin and 50% of our dopamine is produced in our gut, in our, intestinal tract, it's like, it's not just popping a probiotic, you know, our brain and our gut are connected. So it's really important, to be able to soothe our nervous system and create resiliency in our nervous system, right? Creating resiliency and a wider window of tolerance in our parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system, so that we can do those fluctuations of up and down and up and down, so that our gut produces enough hormones for us to feel good. It seems so logic. I mean, it's so logical, the way our systems, it's such a beautiful and elegant system, but our body knows. And, by soothing and stimulating, by learning how to, really fine tune and regulate the nervous system and increase that window of tolerance for being activated and bringing ourselves down into the rest and digest mode, it helps to increase that window of tolerance, which brings more regulation into our nervous system and our endocrine system, creating hormonal balance. So it's a wonderful thing, and then the symptoms they magically go away. Like I'm amazed. Like when I learned all this, and I got a hot flash, I would do specific practices, specific pranayama breathing techniques, and I could nip it in the bud. It was like, oh, no, it's not going to happen. I just threw enough coolness into my system. We're good. It's magical to me. And, not everything is a quick fix like that. It depends what's happening with you, because we're all unique like that. But, sometimes it takes a little longer to bring it into balance. But
I was just thinking when you were talking about gut health that so many times when we're in that fight or flight kind of stress response, 8, 10, 12 hours a day, and it shuts down our microbiome and our serotonin and dopamine, like you said, a lot of times in order to try to get the serotonin, for instance, that we're not now producing because we're stressed out all the time, we will grab simple carbohydrates and try to get that serotonin from an outside source, which then, of course, so many of us have found in perimenopause and menopause, we put on weight. I mean, what if it was just that simple that, hey, you don't have to reach outside of yourself to get the serotonin. You can do Brahmari breathing and create nitric oxide through the humming and create more serotonin. I mean, we have the research to show that these practices really work.
yeah. And then, of course, that affects directly the possible weight gain during this transition, right? Being under stress, emotionally eating, or not being conscious of what you're eating, being mindful when you're eating, and just doing it out of habit instead of in a more parasympathetic state of mind when you're consuming food.
Yeah, this idea of I don't have to reach for food to soothe me or give me serotonin. I can actually reach for yoga practices that are going to change my state.
Mhm.
I can go do a yoga nidra for 20 minutes and get a very similar effect to eating, a Snickers candy bar or something. I mean, to me, it's like you said, it's almost magical. And I wish all women knew what was available to them.
Yeah, and the biggest one of the things I keep running up with as a yoga therapist is, I've said this before to you. I almost wish it was a different name, even though I don't want to, take away from yoga. But in America, it's gotten so watered down just to asana. People hear, "Oh, you're a yoga therapist. Oh, I know what you do." Like, I know I've taken yoga before, and it's like it's not a group yoga class. It's not just a yoga, a, not just, but it's not a yoga class, a yoga group class with just a yoga teacher. It's like we have so much more training and so many more tools that we're utilizing when we're working with somebody. We can do small functional groups or one-on-one, but it's not 30, 40 people all at once, because the same practice doesn't work for each person. It could, I mean, I've experienced it myself. I've in the old days, going to a group class and ending up totally aggravated and like a headache. And it's like, what is happening? I'm so mad right now. And it's like, oh, prana prakopa. Yeah. Okay. That was not the right class for me today. you know?
Prana prakopa being angry prana in the body
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
was caused by the group yoga class in 106-degree heat and 42 sun salutations.
Yeah. As a pitta woman, especially going through menopause, like, wow, why am I having a bunch of hot flashes now? And not connecting it to maybe what you have done earlier in the day, the hot yoga or the, you know, whatever it may be, overworking.
Well, and that's really interesting because in yoga therapy, we do an assessment, even if it's individual or small group, there's going to be an assessment to see if you have an imbalance causing your foggy brain. That is very different imbalance than having hot flashes, right? And so doing those assessments to really look at the specific symptoms that each woman is having is super important to be able to create an individualized plan to help her with her particular symptoms. It's not that we're treating menopause, we're actually co-negotiating with a human being in front of us and their particular needs, their lifestyle, the time that they have to do a practice or make these lifestyle changes, their values, their beliefs. It's very specific to that individual, her symptoms and her life and her needs.
Mhm. Yeah, and that's what makes it so beautiful. It's such an elegant system, looking at all the different layers of the human system. They may come in with, I don't want to have hot flashes anymore, but you're actually helping them with a lot of other things. Maybe their relationships will get better, because they won't be so out of balance that they're fighting with their mate. There's a lot of subtle work that goes on with it, and that's why yoga is experiential. But that difference of delineating between group yoga class, it's like we have to educate the entire public, all to be able to know the difference. And because it is a new profession in the West, especially, it's a whole training, a training of the mind that we need to do overall to delineate it.
Exactly. And so I'm just going to bring up, a little infographic here of a journal that you created, and it's titled the Menopause Journal, and you shared it with me. And your company is called Lucid State Yoga Therapy, which we'll talk more about at the end. But you're basically, do you want to talk us through this and what your intention is for having women track what's going on inside of them?
Yeah, we're looking at the chart right now, though, Amy. Your menopause chart.
Hmm.
Is that what we want to?
Yes, thank you. I think I grabbed the wrong one. Okay. Now do you see it?
Not yet. Nope.
Okay. Let me just get rid of the other one and then
Zoom.
see. Yeah. Now do you see it?
Yes.
Okay. So tell us about this menopause journal that you've put together.
This is for a hormone balance workshop that I did. It was a 2-hour workshop. I'll be running that again at some point. But it's just it was an education to be able to expose people to how it actually works, using the chart that you had, your chart that you had up earlier, to explain what's happening in this time of our lives. And I created this as part of the workshop for people to be able to start actually tuning into what's happening in their systems. If if they're feeling certain ways, to be able to start cultivating the opposite gunas, and bring in other qualities out of the 5 elements that may help to bring them back into balance. So that's why I created.
So it kind of sounds like you use an Ayurvedic lens to look at menopausal symptoms, and these two charts that you have in your journal are ones that come from um, you know our work at Optimal State Yoga Therapy School.
Mhm.
Why don't you just talk us through the different zones and how women experience menopause, both emotionally and mentally, but also physically and somatically? Could you just kind of walk us through the different zones and talk about them?
Yeah. What I could do is like bring up some common menopause symptoms, if that would be helpful, and
Sure.
then apply them to the zones. Um, so when I do polls in my Facebook group, just wondering, it's like, what is your biggest concern? It's usually weight gain, insomnia, anxiety are always like up at the top. So let's take weight gain. With weight gain, you look at the physical chart, which is over on my right here, right? Maybe you're feeling sluggish or stiff or heavy. That's how your body is feeling, right? And this blue zone on both charts, this is the Kapha zone. So in Ayurveda, it's Kapha, or we can call it the blue zone. Um, just to give you some groundwork first, let me just go through all the zones. The red zone is a Pitta zone, and the white zone is the Vata. In the middle is Sattva. That's where we want to be, right? We want to feel open and receptive and empowered and radiant and all these wonderful things. So, going back to weight gain, if our body is feeling in the blue zone, we would look at this chart and acknowledge, okay, I'm feeling heavy and I'm feeling, kind of toxic and all these other things, right? And so, with your with the optimal state, we learn how to help to create and cultivate the opposite of that. Up in the white zone, you would have some anxiety, maybe, right? Or feeling worried and fragile, all kinds of things like that. So you look at these zones, the white zone or the blue zone or the red zone, with either the emotions or the physical state, and you put the name, you choose where you're feeling, right? You kind of tune in and you're feeling, I feel like I need to move. I feel like I'm worried. It's like, okay, that's your anxiety. And then you would bring the anxiety down. The red zone, which is Pitta, again, you just kind of look at these charts and you see where your emotions and your feelings, how you're feeling in your body, fits into these charts. And if you're having hot flashes, a lot of time it's in the red zone, right? You've got things going on in your life that are causing you to be impatient, you're overworking, maybe you're frustrated, you're angry, things like that. And so those kind of apply like that, and then you would do the appropriate practices to bring that back into balance to the gold zone. So I don't
So
know if that totally answered your
it
question. I
did,
feel
it
like I went
did.
a little a little bottom it.
I think it shows how different we are when we work as yoga therapists, that, you know, people are going to fill out your journal. They're going to track the different symptoms and tell you I'm having insomnia versus hot flashes versus weight gain, or God forbid, all of the above. And they're going to track these things and bring them to you so that you can make appropriate practices for them, both lifestyle interventions to help bring them back into balance, but also asana, pranayama, meditation, practices that they can do every day to be more in balance in their body and mind. And one of the things that I think is so cool about yoga therapy is that we might find that someone is having weight gain in their physical body, but their mind is in, all over the place, almost
Mhm.
like juggling too many balls at once and you can't keep track of all the balls, right? So as a yoga therapist, we can help plan practices where the mind comes down out of a vata imbalance, where there's too much going on, too worried, too fragile, too sensitive, too overwhelmed. But the body actually needs movement, and it actually needs to sweat a little bit to lose that weight, right? So being able to address when the body and mind are actually in different directions and how to write an appropriate practice and lifestyle guidelines for that is so cool to me. What do you think?
Oh, I think it's amazing. And I mean, I would say that most people have imbalances in different areas. It's not like I'm all blue zone with my emotional level, my personality, my physical level. I mean, it seems like it's like there's always a little bit of a mix going on. So is that what you find?
Yeah. It's very rare that the body and the mind are out of balance in the same direction at the same time.
Yeah.
And so I think it takes a very skilled yoga therapist to be able to read those symptoms, to take a proper assessment and help figure out what's really going on, and then write appropriate therapeutic plans that are going to address all the different layers of the human system.
Absolutely. And again, that's one of the big differences between what we do and what a group yoga class is, because they can't do that. They have too many people in the class.
And I think that's, again, we're not denigrating group yoga class. I mean, I think many of us love teaching group yoga class. I love teaching it, but it's almost like a totally different thing. I mean, it isn't even it's just like you said, yoga therapy. The name of it suggests that we're doing almost similar to what we do in a group yoga class, and it couldn't be really more different.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So, Stephanie, I want to also talk to you about how did you decide to become a specialist in yoga therapy and menopause and hormones and women's issues? Because as yoga therapists, we are generalists. We do work with the whole system. You are going to have people come in with knee problems or sacroiliac joint issues, or a variety of other things that are kind of outside of menopause. How did you decide to kind of say, I'm going to set my shingle up and talk about menopause, while in the back of your mind, I think that you're going to be working with every symptom that could come up. People will come with, you know, dysregulated nervous systems or ADHD. I think just because you're a menopausal specialist doesn't mean that you will only work on the menopause. You'll be working with the whole human being, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, uh, It's important to have a niche, right? I mean, to niche down like that, it is my passion. And it takes work to figure out what your passion is. Sometimes, you need to do the work, the internal work, to be able to figure that out, and what audience you are meant to serve. So through your professional development class is how I came to that. Actually, I took your class, your professional development module, and it's been so helpful to me. Like I was able to niche down, because I'm grateful that everybody is so unique, right? Because I wouldn't want to just do only this one little thing all the time. I mean, it's wonderful because we get to work with the entire individual, and everybody's so unique. There's always new new things to try to help them solve, right? New things that are ailing them. Um, but I have a passion for women's health, women's health and wellness. I don't want someone to go through what I went through. Um, it it was it was horrible, and it's like I can help people not go through that. It's like that's what I'm supposed to do in this life. So that is one of the things I'm supposed to do in this life. And right now, I'm kind of working on refining my message. So it's like, you have to have your specific niche for marketing. Really, it comes down to that. And it's like, if you don't put a marketing message out there, people can't find you. So I'm niching more. I'm in the process of kind of digesting, but I've got a couple areas that I'm looking at to even fine tune my menopause specialty even more, and bring in the appropriate clients for me that will resonate with me, and I will resonate with them, and so that I can help them. So
This is something I think a lot of people who go through yoga therapy school are not understanding. And that is that they're at this moment, I think this is going to change in the next 2 years, but at this moment, there aren't a ton of, jobs out there that pay really high, have benefits and retirement, all of that. So we're having to go out and create business. And a lot of people got into yoga and yoga therapy because they love the healing science of it, but they didn't realize they had to also be a businesswoman or a businessman. And so this idea of finding a niche that you can serve people to get them to come to you, because let's face it, when you market and say, I'm a yoga therapist, come see me, people don't know what that is. They don't know how you can benefit them. They don't know what to expect in terms of outcome if they come and see you. So by specializing in a niche like menopause, you're saying, I can help you with insomnia. I can help you with anxiety. I can help you with foggy brain. I can help you with hot flashes, mood adjustments, and it gives them an entry door to come in. And as well as I do that once they get in there, you're just working with a human being on anything that causes them suffering. You really don't always stay only with the hot flashes and insomnia. Maybe you start there, but especially after you help people heal, now they're coming for meaning and purpose, or wow, my back got a little tweaked, or something else. So you're going to have to be a well-rounded yoga therapist on all the layers of the human system, even if you're a menopause specialist, don't you think?
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And that's, that's one of the two things I'm looking at right now, or I'm not really looking at it, because I need to kind of bring my head out of it and let let the prana flow, do my practices to let my prana flow freely. But it's a seed that's kind of working its way through my system right now, and that would be with trauma and menopause, because I truly believe that um, you experience worse symptoms if there's been trauma. um, I don't know if there's a study for that. I need to look that up, but I think there's a correlation, because it really, it feels right. It feels right to me. I would need to dig to see if I could even find if a research study has been done. But I mean, there's not that much that's been done with yoga and menopause, first of all, or menopause, on its own. So, yeah.
I love that potential niche. And I love that you're niching down. First, you start with menopause and the normal symptoms that so many people feel, but then saying, there's a very specific type of person that I think I can really help.
Mhm.
And it happens to be someone who has that intersection of trauma and menopause. And that's where I feel like I'll be of service to the world instead of just keeping such a broad niche of all menopause. And again, it's not that you would turn anyone down, but it's when you put yourself out there and let the world know who you are and what you love and what you do, you're getting pretty specific so that people can see, oh, that's the woman that I want to go to because she's going to be able to care for me, nourish me, nurture me, and take into account that I have had trauma and it may be impacting my menopausal symptoms.
Yeah.
I love that.
Cool. Yeah, it's also tricky because in our culture, it's like you need to find, at least, for being a yoga therapist, it's like you need to find the people who are wanting to help themselves. They may be on hormone replacement, and that's fine because it doesn't necessarily fix all their issues, all the symptoms they're suffering from. It's kind of like a band-aid, really, because this imbalance is still underlying in there. But it's the people who want to be proactive with their health and maybe can't or don't want to take hormones, that want to experience the fullness of the transition and go through the portal and just step into that cronehood and live their most joyous life. Like you said at the beginning, it's like, just getting closer, me, towards passing through that portal. I've noticed, and I don't know if it's because I'm closer to the portal. Well, I do know why. It's because my hormones are starting to chill out because I've done all my practices to create balance in myself. But it's that calmness after the storm of the wildfire that's happening in our systems, right? With the extra pitta and the extra vata happening, like the first chart that you had up.
Yeah, let me bring that up
Pull
here. I
that up,
think
yeah.
this is such a great one. Will you kind of explain what you're seeing? Because not everyone on the podcast will see the actual chart. They'll just be hearing about it. So you have to
Oh,
really
okay.
describe it.
Okay, so it's one of Optimal State, Amy's charts again. And what we have are the stages of life. Menopause and perimenopause is the chart. And, like 0 to 16, we have the blue part of life, the blue zone of life. And that is the kapha time of life in Ayurveda. Then we go to 16 to 50, which is the householder time of life. And that's the pitta time of life where we're acquiring, we're doing, our careers going, maybe we're creating a family. And then the next zone that intersects with the red zone, the pitta time of life, is our vata time of life, which is, age 60 plus, our retirement years. And menopause and andropause fall on the cusp of the pitta zone, the red zone, and the vata zone, the white zone. So it's that wild time of life where you've got pitta, which is fire and water, and you've got the vata, which is the air and space. And I like to think of it, living in California, as a giant wildfire, right? Which we have a lot of here, unfortunately. But it's a big wildfire and the wind is blowing the fire, and it's just those are your hormones. They're going all over the place with the air and the fire intersecting there. And then once we pass through menopause, which is 365 days with no bleeding, then you pass through the threshold of menopause, even though we put menopause as an overall label on this transition. It's an actual, basically like a one-day event. You've passed into menopause, 365 days, no cycle, and now you are postmenopausal. Prior to that, you were perimenopausal. So once you pass through that into the vata stage and you are postmenopausal, the ebb and flow, the wildfire is now behind you. And hopefully, if you are in balance, your hormones level out and you don't have as many symptoms. There are people who have symptoms, for the rest of their life, and it's because they're out of balance. So they don't need to suffer like that. It's like, I actually wish and I would like to educate younger women of what's to come, besides educating them on their menstrual cycle and tracking it when they're young. It's like, this is when you're fertile. It's like, this is how you don't get pregnant, this is how you do get pregnant. All of these things with their cycle, it's important to educate on this as well. And if they started doing the proper practices to keep themselves in balance at a younger age, they wouldn't have as hard of a menopause to go through, because they'd already be in balance. And we have to do the work. Like, you have to do the work. You have to get the oil changed in your car. You have to get the tires changed. It's like, we need to spend time on ourselves and taking care of ourselves and learning about ourselves and how to bring ourselves into balance. I think it's really important for our overall health and well-being.
I love what you've just said, that the habitual patterns that we have going into this period of life matter. That if you've already been completely out of balance, having way too much caffeine, working too hard, raising a family, just stressed to the max for 20 years, you're going to have a much harder time getting through menopause than if you had learned an appropriate lifestyle where you did have self-care, you did keep that raging wildfire down a little bit and learn how to manage it before you even come into perimenopause. And like you said, Stephanie, I know women that have been going through this for 15 years. They may have stopped bleeding 12 years ago, but they're still having hot flashes. They're still having insomnia. They're still having anxiety. They're still having brain fog 15 years later, long after they stopped bleeding. I mean, that's insanity. They need you. I want them to find you. That's why I asked you to be on this podcast.
That sounds exhausting to me. And when you're out of balance like that, you can't really step into your fullness. You can't step into your joy. You can't step into your purpose like you should at this. You shouldn't say should, but that you can at this time of life to really experience that full salutogenesis, to have the fullness of life and the joy of life that you can step into at this time, in your wisdom years, in your crone years. So
I love that idea of these should be the best years of our life, not the most miserable, where we're exhausted and angry and like, wow, the kids are gone. We have our time. We're wise. Let's step into the fullness of who we're meant to be, which is what yoga is all about, right? That idea of coming home to your true self and really getting to be you
yeah,
100%.
absolutely. And not caring what others think. That was one of the big things for me, of like really stepping in, even though I haven't passed that threshold yet, just stepping in to who your authentic self, and going, you know what, I'm going to set my boundaries. I'm okay if people don't like me. Like, everybody likes to be liked, but it's like, okay, maybe those people aren't for me, and that's okay, and speaking your truth. It's like, I was ashamed to talk about any kind of anxiety stuff before, because it felt weak, like, oh, that's a weakness, something's wrong with you. And it's like, no, no, this is a very, very common thing. And if you can speak about it, then maybe you're helping somebody else.
I think that's a huge part of how yoga therapy can help us get through menopause is there's a safe person on the other end to speak about these things that can confirm you're not going crazy, that this is normal, it's a phase of life, just like getting your menstrual cycle when you're 12 to 16. Well, this is the other end, and this is a natural phase of life. And I wish I had had someone to go and say these things to, and be heard and seen, and be assured that I'm a normal person, you know?
Yeah, Lori is doing something in the saying something in the chat. So
Yeah, I'll read it. So Lori had said something about people having a medically induced menopause. And she said, I'm not sure if that's the right term, but do you feel that you could even help them get into better balance and deal with the symptoms when that happens? Maybe they've had a surgery to, remove their uterus or something, and all the hormones just, they stop on a dime.
yeah,
What do you think?
absolutely. Yeah, it's the same process, the assessment and looking at all the layers of the human system and find, the appropriate practices and lifestyle modifications. Yeah, they don't need to suffer either. Nobody needs to suffer. Whatever the, you know, whatever their symptoms are, there's appropriate practices and lifestyle modifications for everybody. So,
Can I ask you one last hard question? Because I know we're getting close to the end, but you and I have talked about how sometimes even medical doctors or physicians' assistants, they see yoga as a glorified stretching class. They don't know what yoga therapy is, that we take an assessment and we work with the gunas that we showed you earlier, the vata pitta kapha imbalance that we kind of borrow from Ayurveda. It's very difficult to help some medical professionals understand how much we can actually do.
mhm.
So what have you come to? What kind of wisdom can you share with us about that? Because I think that's the hardest question.
As far as what would we say to them, or
Yeah. Or would we just look for people that are more open, that understand the power of yoga therapy and Ayurveda? Or would you try to convince the Western medical doctor that says, what is, you know, yoga have to do with menopause?
yeah,
What would you advise people?
I think that we need to speak their language. We need to talk about dysregulation of the nervous system. We need to talk about, resiliency in the nervous system and health in the vagus nerve, vagal toning, all of these things, the direct correlation with serotonin, dopamine, and we need to speak their language, because if we don't speak their language, they will not listen. I don't think, unless they're already into yoga and Ayurveda. But then again, most of them, I'm guessing, probably don't know yoga therapy, which is very, very different. So, I think it's important to speak their language, and I actually have that on my Clubhouse bio. I have my stuff for everybody, and then for the doctors, and a whole thing on, like, regulating the nervous system, blah 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 blah. So to be able to speak their language and kind of go, oh, I know those words. Wait a minute, what's happening here? And then they would, hopefully pay attention. That's another thing that I'm working on right now, is getting ready to, it's still germinating, so I'm waiting till it's ready, but speaking with our local hospital here. I'm in a very small town, and we have um, a small community, and so I think that it would be really helpful for the pain, the addiction, and the menopause, the women that are going through these things, to be able to have, like, maybe small functional groups um, with me, to be able to help them through this. So,
Well, I feel like you shared so much beautiful ancient wisdom with us today and tied it into Western allopathic medical language so that we can kind of maneuver back and forth as needed for the person that's in front of us, which is so important. And I'd love to hear how we can find you on Clubhouse, how we can find you on Facebook, and also your website.
yeah, my website is lucidstateyoga.com. And I actually have a really, well, fun, a fun little quiz on there. It's under quick tips right on the very beginning of my website. And it's a little dosha quiz. It's a little quiz of your symptoms, and that can tell you which way you're out of balance, and then some quick tips on how you can maybe help start bringing yourself back into balance, little lifestyle modifications. And I also have a little anxiety relief kit on there that is a product if you're interested in that, and offer 15-minute consultations. On Clubhouse, I need to look at my handle there, but it's at Stephanie VM. And then my Facebook page is group for menopause is the Wild Hormones Menopause Natural Symptom Relief and Support. I had to look. That's why my face was down. Podcast, it won't matter, but yeah, so that's where I am.
Well, thank you so much for spending the time with us today. And I think if you're out there listening and you're struggling as you go through menopause, schedule one of those 15-minute appointments to explore with Stephanie and just see if there's potential for her to work with you and give you a proper assessment and figure out which direction you're maybe out of balance and what are those lifestyle tips and daily practices to do to bring yourself back into balance. So I'm so grateful, Stephanie, and thankful that you joined us today. And I look forward to talking with you more in the future about this.
Yeah, thank you, Amy. Thank you for having me. I'm very grateful that you're doing this. I love listening to all the other interviews that you're doing. It's so interesting, and I think it's so important. It's helping to bring more awareness about what yoga therapy is. So,
and we're going to have more of these. We're going to have one on PMDD, which is very painful menstrual cycles. We're going to have one on autoimmune. I mean, we're going to keep hitting these women's issues over and over again. So
yeah, that's wonderful. I'm looking forward to listening to those. So thank you again for having me. I appreciate it.
thank you. And thank you to our guests who joined us today, Laurie and Susan and VS. It was really lovely to have you with us and putting some questions out there. And we'll end the evening. Thank you so much. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.